The Denver Broncos season is officially over. At least their playoff hopes are. 2 games remain here, but the Christmas Eve nightmare commenced at Empire Field at Mile High. We'll break down all the action on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Bill Belichick and Bailey Zappi come down from the top of the mountain of Whoville to steal Christmas away from the Denver Broncos and Broncos Country in disappointing fashion. The Broncos collapsed in Sunday's loss. We'll break down all the action on today's brand new post-game report here, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And unfortunately, today's episode doesn't bear gifts under the Christmas tree here for Broncos Country. We all got coal in our stocking in Sunday's outcome for the Broncos game on Christmas Eve here. Today's episode show brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, potentially really cheap tickets next week on New Year's Eve here. Sayre, I don't even know where we begin here, my friend. Look, obviously the Broncos made this a very interesting game late in the fourth quarter. As cool as the comeback was, as entertaining as it could have been, this was an ugly game. This was an abysmal performance here by the Broncos, disappointing. And more importantly, it raises so many questions, I think, about the future of this team going forward, particularly in the next 2 weeks as well here. But man, can we start with the offense? It was terrible. It was that was the worst offensive performance that I've watched in a long time, Sayre. And we've seen some bad ones here for the Broncos.
Yeah, we talked about in the lead up to this game that it could be tough going for the offense against this Patriots defense, right? But I don't think we really expected the offense to struggle this badly. I mean, 4 of 13 on third downs in this game, and that really paints a pretty good picture of how bad it was. As you said, Cody, I mean, the offense is one of the worst performances we've seen from them, especially given the stakes, right? Especially given what they had an opportunity to go do. And the tone was really set immediately. The Broncos defense forces a turnover on the first play from scrimmage of the game. Your offense has 6 yards to get a touchdown, and they take 4 plays and they can't get it in. And Russell Wilson nearly threw an interception on his first pass attempt of the game. So, I mean, it really was kind of a sign of things to come for the night. Although, like you said, the Broncos did make a furious comeback there late in the game, and you do have to commend them for sticking with it and for being able to do that. I mean, to get 2 touchdowns, 2 2-point conversions, like they did fight hard to get back into the game at the end, but ultimately this is a game that you should have won handily. You had opportunities from the Patriots starting with that drive on the 6-yard line, and your next possession started on the Patriots 46. Like, the Broncos should have gone up 14-0 early in this game, and they could have dominated the way that we talked about in our Keys to Victory episode by go up 2 scores on Bailey Zappi and the Patriots. And people, don't take me wrong, I see a lot of people jumping into my mentions on Twitter and things like that. I don't mean to diminish Bailey Zappi, who's a heck of a player. Obviously, he's made it to the NFL. He's starting games for the New England Patriots. That's a big deal. What I'm talking about is the discrepancy between Bailey Zappi and Russell Wilson, a $245 million player at the position. There's a massive discrepancy there. It's not meant to be a disrespect to Bailey Zappi or to write him off. We talked about in the crossover, could he carve up the Broncos D? Well, he did go out there and do exactly that, and the offense couldn't keep up for the majority of the game.
And look, I think as much, and we've talked about this as well, and we're going to have our conversations about Russell Wilson, Sean Payton, and this offense even further this week, because it's going to be a big talking point here as the team prepares for the offseason. Their playoff hopes are officially dead. Well, not officially. There's like a 5% chance they make it in. But let's just be honest here. There's not hope for this season for Denver to make it into the postseason. This was the knife through the heart of everybody in Broncos Country. I mean, Sayre, that stadium was so quiet in the fourth quarter at the start of it. The boo birds were loud, and then Denver made it exciting, and Broncos Country had hope again. And then all of a sudden, just for them to falter away. And look, can we talk about Sean Payton's play calling really in that kind of final stretch there of that fourth quarter, choosing to burn the timeouts to obviously give Denver some time, and then just the play calls and what Denver did offensively with that. I don't know what that was, but that was not what we've been accustomed to seeing from Sean Payton. And as much flack as Russell Wilson gets, as much criticism as Russ is going to get, right? And Russ deserves some criticism. Sean Payton, I think, in my opinion here, Sayre, is also deserving of criticism as well for how the offense has played.
I think so too. I really do. I mean, yeah, the comeback was amazing, but here's the scenario that you forfeited in that final minute and a half of the game when you took those two timeouts. The Patriots were gifting the Denver Broncos overtime. They said, "Hey, we want to go to overtime. We're going to run with Ezekiel Elliott, not on just one play, but on the next play as well." Like they wanted to get that game to overtime. And what does overtime do? It guarantees you a change of possession. Whereas the field goal from the Patriots kicker, the poor guy who missed a couple of kicks earlier in the game, 57 yards to win it. Now you don't have a chance for your offense to go back out there on the field. You gave up that chance. So I think it's absolutely fair to criticize Sean Payton, to criticize, the usage of personnel. Why is Javonte Williams getting so much run? Why is Jerry Jeudy not getting a target until late in the fourth quarter? Why are you running a toss to the short side of the field right after Marvin Mims catches a pass deep downfield? Why are you so lackadaisical, seemingly offensively, walking back to the huddle as precious seconds are ticking off the clock? I mean, there's so many different aspects of it that, yeah, I think there's a lot of valid criticism of Sean Payton, but ultimately, when you have Sean Payton having a bad game and you have Russell Wilson also having a bad game, even though the Broncos only lost by 3 points, Cody, it just felt like this was really one of the team's worst performances of the year.
I mean, it really was. And you mentioned that first possession where the defense, DJ Jones, gets the strip sack. And Denver, I mean, I like that they went for it on fourth down. It's like, all right, hey, you know what? The defense just did something really big. Okay, you can go for it on fourth down. You don't get it. It's going to be at the 1. But then it's like you look back at it in hindsight after the game's over. Okay, you lose by 3 points. Yeah, at least you still went to overtime in this game if that were the case. So just missed opportunity. And then obviously just like turnovers. I mean, there was that one, obviously there was that one there. Talk about losing the football there, Javonte Williams. And I see a lot of people piling on Javonte. I'm going to take some time. I feel like we should definitely dedicate a segment this week, probably on tomorrow's episode of the show, to really talk about Javonte Williams and how the fan base has suddenly soured on him, which to me is ridiculous. I hate the fickleness of that as it pertains to players. And there's a lot going on with Javonte that we still have to talk about here. But can we also talk about the fact that there are some questions about this team moving forward? More importantly, with Russell Wilson, I felt like watching this game, I thought to myself, and we've had conversations here, look, Russ hasn't been terrible this season. He hasn't been the reason why the Broncos have lost games, but this was a game where his limitations combined with what you just said, Sean Payton, when they're both struggling, it's a bad sandwich here for the Broncos, and it creates a lot of questions and a lot of frustration in the eyes of members of Broncos Country. And look, we're going to dive deep in all that. We have to talk about the Broncos defense as well. They got off to the hot start. They were hot and cold for a good portion of the night, and ultimately it had cost them a little bit late in that fourth quarter. We'll dive deep into that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast post-game report is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know it, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And as the weather gets colder, which it was in Denver on Sunday, the NFL offers to stay hot on FanDuel. There was some interesting action going on around the entire NFL, and FanDuel is a place where you can get in on all the heat. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you had somehow put the money line on the New England Patriots, you put $5 on it, you walk up and you're going to wake up with a Christmas present of $150. Unfortunately, at the expense of the Denver Broncos' ineptitude and losing in Sunday's game at Empower Field at Mile High. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. The NFL playoff picture is heating up. The NBA season is ongoing. The NHL is on the ice, and FanDuel has you covered with every option you can think of. Their app is super easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. Once again, FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
The Denver Broncos defense only allowed 16 points really right as the game was on the line. Unfortunately, Cody, it was the 19th points that they allowed that ended up costing the game. Of course, the rest of the points that were scored by the New England Patriots came on a special teams blunder from Denver. The defense did its job for the most part, but that for the most part qualification is what we need to talk about and what went wrong ultimately defensively in this game for the Denver Broncos. But want to give a shout out to all of you everyday listeners of Locked On Broncos, sticking with us through thick and thin. Merry Christmas to every single one of you listening out there on Christmas Day. If you're alone on Christmas, especially, we're so grateful that you rock with us and that you allow us to be part of your day. Or if you're with family, whatever you may be doing this holiday season, we appreciate you for making us part of your everyday right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Cody, I kind of mentioned it. I mean, in a roundabout way, this Denver Broncos defense did their job against the New England Patriots, right? They allowed 19 points. Typically, you expect in a game, hey, if you allow 19 points, that's pretty good. You should be able to score 20 or more, especially against a team that's 3-11 going into the game, right? But unfortunately, a special teams blunder cost the Broncos. And then situationally, that's where I think the Broncos went wrong defensively in this game.
Yeah, I mean, situationally, things did just not match up well for Denver. I mean, you talk about big plays being allowed, keep momentum, and look, I think were the moments this season where the Broncos defense, they play well, they hold their own. I mean, they open up, they forced the Patriots, turnover on the first play of the game, punt, and then all of a sudden, the offense can't do anything with the opportunities that the defense is giving them, and so the defense is on the field more than they should be in situations. And then there's, as you mentioned, some situational plays that happen, some big plays. There was, I think it was there was a big sack that had happened. Jonathan Cooper backed Bailey Zappi up, and all of a sudden, you have him taking a whole shot against cover 2 down the left sideline I think it was like 2nd and 20, if I'm not mistaken. And he picked up the first down there in that standpoint. And then that allowed the Patriots to drive, to be able to set up for points here. But the thing that struck me as frustrating is, okay, hey, you look at this stat book right at the end of the game, you look at Denver's defense on third down. Okay, they did great there. They held the Patriots to 3 of 13 on third down, but they didn't do a great job on first down, and they didn't do a great job on second down consistently enough through the night, allowing some big plays. And look, I think there's a bigger conversation we're going to have here as well. I mean, they forced one turnover, right? That was great, but the offense couldn't capitalize on it. So that's a recipe for disaster when the offense isn't able to do the things that your defense, needs them to do to benefit what they're doing on the field. Like, hey, we got the football for you. Do something with it. Give us some points. Give us some cushion, because then it'll allow the Broncos defense to play a little bit more freely. So Denver goes into a halftime, obviously, with a 7-3 lead. And then just after that, we knew how the second half opened up. Things were not ideal. Big plays, chunk yardage. I mean, the Broncos offense sputtered on 3 straight possessions. And then on 2 of the Patriots' three opening possessions of the second half, they scored 2 touchdowns. And that right there was the swing of the game, the swing of the momentum. And unfortunately, we talked about Sean Payton's play calling issues a little bit late in that game. The game management put the Broncos in a bad situation. Bailey Zappi carved them up all night, whether they were in man coverage, whether they were in zone coverage, and he nails the back shoulder throw to Devontae Parker for 27 yards. That gives them enough opportunity to run another play to get into field goal range. They spike it, and then they kick the game-winning field goal here. I just felt like the defense, for as much as they've done this season, I feel like at this point, they've been carrying the water for the last handful of weeks. It's caught up to them in the last 2 weeks, and quarterbacks have carved them up. Bailey Zappi, 25 of 33 for 256 and 2 touchdowns. He was impressive. And look, he did it on the run as well. And that, to me, I think is a frustrating point of this Broncos loss.
Yeah, the pass rush simply wasn't good enough, was it? I mean, that first play of the game where you have the strip sack setting up for the touchdown, that was awesome. And you hoped that could set the tone for the rest of the game. But ultimately, after that play by DJ Jones, the Broncos only had 4 more QB hits in the entire game. And the sack that you mentioned from Jonathan Cooper, that was it. And really, I mean, that's not what you want over the course of a game for a team that excels at creating turnovers and relies upon that pass rush to make things easier for the defensive backfield, to allow them to attack the football. it simply wasn't good enough. Even though the Broncos were 3 of 13 allowing third downs, like they did their job getting off the field. They did their job making sure at the end of the game in those situations, getting those possessions for your offense. But ultimately, the pass rush needs to be better in those opportunities where, hey, the Patriots were willing to take a couple shots at Pat Surtain, who seemed to be in great position, but wide receivers just made better plays. And then you said, like you said, you had the breakdown in the cover too when Bailey Zappi broke the pocket there. I mean, just other opportunities throughout the game that this pass rush had to create game-changing plays, and they simply couldn't do it. They simply couldn't get to Zappi, and he had good pocket presence. He did. He was making some plays in this game with his legs, getting outside, not having to always work within structure. And I think that's what really helped him in this game. It's what really hurt the Denver Broncos. And now the pass rush without Nick Bonito has had 2 bad games in a row, going back to that ugly loss against Detroit as well.
Well, and here's the thing that frustrates me. Once again, watching another week of NFL games, Jarrett Stidham is able to do not Jarrett Stidham. I was alluding to something there. I don't know why. We'll get to that in a little bit. Bailey Zappi was doing things that Russell Wilson simply just couldn't do, and that's standing in the pocket, and that's being able to throw across the middle of the field, or more importantly, throwing the ball quick, getting it out of his hands. And I think defensively for Denver was not able to dictate, right? Vance Joseph told us earlier this week, we need to get back to dictating it versus their offense dictating our circumstances for us. This was another week where it got dictated. And look, here's the deal. Okay, Pat Surtain didn't have the best game, right? He didn't have a great game here for Denver. But all of a sudden, like the thing that frustrates me, Sayre, and I understand it's the 24-hour rule. Fans can be emotional at times, but it just frustrates me that all of a sudden, like, oh, he's overrated. Like fans just suddenly turn like he's the greatest in the world on one play, but then now he's overrated because he had a bad game. Like the best players in the league, the greatest players in the league are allowed to have bad games, folks. It doesn't mean that they're overrated. It just means, you know what? It just wasn't their night. It happens. It's professional sports. But the idea that the fan base is so quick to turn on a player, it doesn't sit well with me with Javonte Williams and how fans are after him right now. It doesn't sit well with me how fans are all of a sudden all after Patrick Surtain after tonight's game. These guys had a bad game. It's part of the deal. It's part of the gig. But when they score, when they're moving the ball, they're doing their job, they're the greatest ever, right? It's just be consistent with it. Understand, like, hey, there's going to be room for error for these guys. The defense didn't play their best in the moments where they needed to. And unfortunately, everything else, it wasn't just them. The offense, special teams, and defense collectively, all 3 phases hurt the Broncos in this game, which ended their playoff chances. And unfortunately, look, you still have 2 games left on the season. So what does that mean? What are you fighting for? Like, there's a lot of questions that loom large here with just 2 weeks remaining in the NFL regular season. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to give you a little bit of a preview and share our thoughts on it as we look to expound on this in a bigger way this week here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast post-game report is brought to you by our friends over there at the Gametime app. And Gametime alleviates some of the issues that you may have run into if you've had a bad ticket buying experience in the past. You don't have to worry about that, and you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime, they have last-minute tickets, flash deals, and zone deals. I imagine with New Year's Eve coming up and the Broncos playoff hopes being dead, I'm sure you can get some great deals on the Broncos-Chargers game this upcoming week at Empower Field at Mile High. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You get all-in prices that show you your total up front so that you know that you're getting a great deal without any hidden fees, and you could buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase here today. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, disappointing fashion as the Broncos' playoff hopes are all dashed on Christmas Eve. We talked about the Grinch coming down from the top of the mountain to Whoville. There is no Christmas spirit here for Broncos Country. We all got coal in our stockings as we recap this game here. Frustrating as it is, Sayre, look, there's still 2 weeks left in the regular season. There are things that I feel like we need to know in terms of determining the direction here, as Sean Payton will now look to enter his first true offseason, a full offseason as the head coach of the Denver Broncos. What will it look like? What decisions have to be made here in the next 2 weeks that maybe give us an idea of what's to come here? Real quick, just want to say thank you so much to everybody on Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, 2 games left here. Chargers next week at home, and then a road game against the Las Vegas Raiders. There are a lot of questions here, and I think so much of them, Sayre, in my opinion, I think are going to start with Russell Wilson here. In these final 2 games, should the Denver Broncos play Russell Wilson? Should they start him or should they start Jarrett Stidham? Because the one thing I want to reference here, there's a lot of talk. Obviously, that $37 million gets kicked in on the 5th day of the new league year in March. But if Denver is planning on moving on from Russell Wilson, there are some risks here that are associated with him playing in 2 games. And it goes back to the whole what the Raiders did with Derek Carr last year. If he gets hurt, that money becomes guaranteed. So, Sayre, in your opinion, should the Broncos play Jarrett Stidham the next 2 weeks?
Yes, they absolutely should, Cody. And it's largely because of the fact that I don't think the Broncos are going to commit to 2 more years of Russell Wilson after this year. And specifically, I guess I should say, I don't think Sean Payton is going to commit to 2 more years of Russell Wilson, because that's the proposition that we're talking about. If we're talking about guaranteed for injury, or if we're talking about Russell Wilson being on the roster as of the 5th day of the 2024 league year, I mean, we'll have plenty of time to discuss the offseason, but the reality is that kind of does start right now. You have to start thinking about that going forward. And ultimately, that would mean that the Broncos are moving on from Russell Wilson before that contract extension even kicks in. We understand that Russell Wilson has been paid a lot of the guaranteed money that he's already gotten on his contract. He made over $50 million in 2022. He's obviously made a lot more money here in 2023. The Broncos have paid out a significant portion of his contract, but when you break it down, he got $124 million guaranteed at signing, $161 million in total guarantees. The difference between those 2 numbers is the $37 million that you mentioned, Cody, which guarantees on the 5th day of the 2024 league year, and that's down the road. So we're talking about the Broncos guaranteeing money for 2025 here coming up in 2024. Does Sean Payton want to do that? Did he sign up for 3 years of Russell Wilson as his quarterback? I don't think so. And I think that the Broncos will get a look at Jarrett Stidham, and I wouldn't be surprised if that news comes down rather quickly after the fallout of this game.
Well, to be honest with you, at the 4th quarter, when Denver was down after that Marvin Mims kick return that got returned for a touchdown, I was thinking in my head, like, the offense has been so bad. Like, the fans were booing at this point. Like, are we going to see Jarrett Stidham warm up? Like, Denver has to think about these things. I know there's going to be some people that are listening or watching this show that are going to be like, oh, you guys are just hating on Russell Wilson. Look, here's the thing. I love Russell Wilson as a human being. I like him as a player. I just think that we've seen so far this season, Sayre, like, there's been moments where Russ is like, okay, hey, Russ is back. Russ is looking like himself. But it's so inconsistent. It's not necessarily Russ's fault. It's a combination of things. I just feel like the way that the offense is being called, with how Russ is also playing, and in combination when both aren't doing well, it doesn't seem like it's a fit between Russ and Sean Payton, right? Regardless if Sean took this job or not, he was always going to go into the season with Russell Wilson. He had no other choice. But now that he's had a year, like, do we see Sean Payton committing to Russ? I cannot sit here from seeing what I've seen up close and personal at practice, in games, just getting a general vibe of things. I come from the standpoint here, Sayre, for me personally, where I just don't see Sean Payton being on board with that, because Sean's also got a timeline on his job. The Broncos have expectations. Can Russ and Sean get them there? I don't know if the relationship between them, from a play caller to a quarterback standpoint, I just don't know if that's going to be sustainable over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, where Payton is also still under contract. That's a hard thing for me to maybe definitively say I can see it. I can't see it right now. I'm leaning the latter here, where I think there could be a parting of ways at some point. And we'll dive deeper right here this week here on Locked On Broncos. But I also feel like, as well, Sayre, 2 games left, what players should get a little bit more of a look here going forward? I feel like, first off, we saw a little bit of it in Sunday's game. Lucas Kroll getting some run there here for the Broncos, and obviously making some plays, obviously catching a touchdown there. We saw stuff from him. Think we didn't talk about it enough here. Cortland Sutton in concussion protocol left the game early. And Denver didn't really have much of a passing game. You saw Lucas Kroll step up, and you saw Brandon Johnson step up a little bit as well.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of both of those guys. Love to see more Marvin Mims. I know he's part of the reason why they lost this game, but of course, you kind of got to be willing to live with the lumps that rookies take along the
Yeah.
way,
Did
right?
make a
He's a
big play.
playmaker. He did. He made an incredible catch, and one of the best catches of the entire season, quite honestly. I mean, it was a great, great catch, and I'm glad that it stood too. That's another whole thing. The officiating once again, kind of coming back to bite the Broncos a little bit in this game. Like, there was a certain play in the first half. A lot of fans will remember. Why do you have review, Cody, if you can see a guy recovering a fumble on camera? And they can't get things right. So unfortunately for Ben Powers, man, the one time the guy's probably going to touch the ball all year, we all saw it, and the officials didn't call it right. But whatever. I mean, I guess that is what it is. But as far as young players we want to see more of, I think it's those receivers. You want to see the receivers getting more opportunities. Want to see Lucas Kroll getting more opportunities. Would love to see Greg Dulcich come back to the fold and get some positive momentum going into the offseason, right? And I don't know
Should
how
he, though?
realistic that is, but should he? Yeah, I don't know. Should he? Does that take away from Lucas Kroll? I don't know. So more Jaleel McLaughlin. I think that's more obvious after this game against the Patriots as well. He's definitely the Broncos' best running back when it comes to just the burst and when it comes to the ability to hit the home run. I just, like you mentioned with Javonte, there's a lot of hot and cold on him with the fan base. I think some of it is stemmed from the fact that you see Jaleel McLaughlin out there making decisive cuts. You see him out there showing the burst. You see him out there making plays, whereas Javonte's he's having a tough time. So
Yeah.
I'd love to see more Jaleel. I'd love to see a lot of these. I'd love to see Stidham. I would. I mean, at this point, why not, right? So let's see what Stidham's got in the Sean Payton offense and why the Broncos signed him to a $10 million deal.
Well, and on top of that, too, going back to Javonte, I feel like Javonte's had a pretty big workload this year. Lessen that a little bit. And that's nothing against Javonte. Look, I also think part of it, too, is also play calling. Like when Javonte's in the game and they have 12 personnel, everyone knows, okay, hey, it's either going to be an inside run or it's going to be a toss play here. And it's not Javonte's fault, but Javonte's hit a little bit of a wall. You know how you get a guy away from that wall a little bit? Lessen the workload a little bit. I mean, I was surprised we didn't see Samaje Perine. I don't think he saw his first touch till the second quarter. I think to the two minute drill that they were running there. I didn't think we saw that. Jerry Jeudy, once again, not seeing a single target till the 9-minute and 12-second mark of the fourth quarter. Well after, like Courtland Sutton left in the first quarter. Didn't even see a target until then. Like, to me, Sayre, that's not just on, quarterback play. That's also on the coach. It's on play calling that you're not getting guys featured here. And Sean Payton said it after the game. The reason we went to the running backs a little bit more in the passing game was because New England played more zone defense than we wanted. I understand that. But you're allowing them to dictate what you're going to do on the offensive side of the ball. And that is not sustainable here if the Broncos hope to have success in the future. So there's going to be some changes. There's going to be some bigger questions. I feel like, Sayre, we're going to have to spend a little bit more time on this week here. We'll get Broncos Country's thoughts on maybe Jarrett Stidham. What should the Broncos do in these final two games if they are operating on the standpoint that Russ will not be back next season for this team? That might be a tough decision. It's going to come down from the front office here. But what should they do as well with these final two games of the regular season? A disappointing, frustrating, no good, embarrassing loss here for the Broncos on Christmas Eve. And unfortunately, it came on a time where we're supposed to be celebrating and being happy and thankful. And, it's the holidays. So Broncos Country, please do us a favor. Thank you so much for tuning in to us here today. Enjoy your Christmas day. Sayre Bedinger, myself, we'll be back on Tuesday morning. We'll sit down and record a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, for all of you to discuss what's next. We'll also hear from Broncos head coach Sean Payton and see what's left with this team. 2 weeks left on the season. Playoff hopes dead in the water. Merry Christmas.